The Velthri had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 47 worlds, and their fleets moved through space like predators who had never known fear. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed smaller species, and built monuments to their own greatness that could be seen from orbit. In all that time, they had never once considered humanity a threat. Humans were young. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 2 centuries ago. They controlled a handful of colony worlds in a single arm of the galaxy, far from the center of power. The Velthri viewed them the way a great beast might view an insect, something too small to notice, too weak to matter. That changed on the day they decided to make an example new. Meridian was a human colony world on the edge of explored space. It was not wealthy or powerful. 9 million people lived there, farmers who grew crops in alien soil, engineers who built homes and hospitals, teachers who raised children under a foreign sun. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives. They had something the Velthri wanted. Beneath the surface of New Meridian lay vast deposits of rare minerals. These minerals powered Velthri weapons and ships. The Dominion sent a message to the colony's governor: surrender the mining rights, or face consequences. Governor Alina Vasquez was 63 years old. She had spent her life building New Meridian from a collection of tents into a thriving world. She read the Velthri demand and called a meeting of the Colonial Council. The discussion lasted for hours. When it ended, she sent her response. New Meridian would not surrender. The minerals belonged to the people who had worked the land, not to an empire that had never set foot on their world. If the Velthri wanted to negotiate fair trade agreements, they were welcome to talk, but they would not bow to threats. The Velthri did not negotiate. They had not expected resistance from such a small colony, and they saw an opportunity. Other species had been growing restless under Dominion rule. A demonstration of power would remind everyone of their place. Hi. Admiral Kethvorin assembled a fleet of 30 warships and traveled to New Meridian. When he arrived, he did not attack immediately. Instead, he opened a broadcast channel not just to the colony, but to every inhabited world in the galaxy. 14,000 planets received the signal. Billions of beings across hundreds of species watched their screens as the Velthri fleet surrounded a small blue world. Kethvorin appeared on the broadcast. He was tall and pale, with the sharp features and cold eyes that marked Velthri nobility. He spoke calmly, as if discussing something routine. The human colony of New Meridian has refused a lawful request from the Velthri Dominion, he said. They have 1 hour to reconsider. If they do not comply, we will demonstrate the cost of defiance. Let all species witness and learn. On Earth, it was morning in Geneva when the broadcast began. Within minutes, every news network had picked up the signal. People stopped in the streets to watch screens in shop windows. Families gathered around their devices. The whole planet held its breath. In the colonial capital of New Meridian, Governor Vasquez watched the countdown with her council. Some of them wanted to accept the terms. Others wanted to evacuate as many people as possible. But there was no time for evacuation, and everyone knew that surrendering would only delay the inevitable. The Velthri did not want partners. They wanted subjects. Vasquez recorded her response. She stood straight, her gray hair pulled back, her voice steady. She spoke not to the Velthri, but to the watching galaxy. "We are farmers and builders," she said. "We came here to create something new, something good. We will not give that away because someone stronger demands it. If this is how the galaxy works, if might alone determines right, then the galaxy is broken. We will not participate in our own destruction. We will not kneel." The hour ended. The broadcast continued. High Admiral Kethvorin gave the order. The Velthri ships opened fire. The bombardment lasted 11 minutes. Plasma rained from orbit, turning cities into craters and forests into ash. The colonial capital was struck first. Governor Vasquez died in the first 30 seconds, along with her entire council. Then the ships moved outward in an expanding pattern, destroying population centers one by one. 9 million people died. Men and women, children and elderly, doctors and teachers and farmers. 9 million lives ended in 11 minutes. and the Velthari broadcast every second of it, but they did not broadcast in silence. Velthari commentators provided analysis, praising the precision of their weapons and the efficiency of their tactics. They mocked human stubbornness and invited other species to learn from this lesson. One commentator laughed when a human school was struck, calling it cleaning up future problems. On Earth, people watched in horror. Parents covered their children's eyes. Old soldiers who had seen war wept openly. In cities across the planet, crowds gathered in silence, staring at screens that showed their people dying while aliens laughed. When the bombardment ended, Kethvorin appeared again. Behind him, New Meridian burned. "Let this serve as instruction," he said. "The Velthari Dominion does not make requests twice. Minor species would be wise to remember their place." The broadcast ended. For 3 days, humanity did not respond. The Galactic Council expected protests, demands for intervention, desperate pleas for help. Human ambassadors had always been diplomatic, always willing to talk, always seeking peaceful solutions. The Council prepared statements of sympathy and offers of mediation. Instead, something unexpected happened. Every human ambassador in the galaxy recalled to Earth human merchant ships, abandoned their trade routes, and returned to Sol. Communication channels that had connected humanity to the wider galaxy went silent, one by one. Within 72 hours, not a single human vessel remained outside their home system. The Velthari celebrated. They declared that humanity had been broken. The young species had retreated into isolation to grieve and would never threaten anyone again. Other species whispered that humans had learned their lesson. The galaxy moved on, but those who paid attention noticed something strange. The humans had not begged or threatened. They had not denounced the Velthari or demanded justice. They had simply stopped talking. On Earth, behind closed doors, something was happening. The governments of every nation on the planet met in emergency sessions. Old enemies sat together at the same tables. Ancient grudges were set aside. A vote was called, and for the first time in human history, it was unanimous. No one outside Earth knew what had been decided. No one knew what humanity was planning. All they knew was that the humans had gone quiet, and in that silence, something was growing. Something patient, something cold in the Velthari capital. Advisors told High Admiral Kethvorin that the human problem had been solved. He accepted their congratulations and returned to his duties, already forgetting the small blue world he had burned. He would not forget for long. 3 years would pass before humanity spoke again. When they did, they would not come with words of protest or demands for justice. They would come with something far worse, a lesson of their own. Written in fire and silence that the galaxy would never forget, the humans had a saying. Old is their species. Revenge is a dish best served cold. The Velthari were about to learn what that meant. For 3 years, the Sol system was silent. No human ships left Earth's borders. No human voices answered on galactic communication channels. Merchant species who had traded with humanity for generations sent messages asking about commerce, about treaties, about simple conversation. They received no reply. It was as if humanity had built a wall around itself and refused to let anyone see inside. The Velthari declared victory. High Admiral Kethvorin gave speeches about the weakness of young species and the natural order of the galaxy. The Dominion's power grew as other civilizations saw what happened to those who resisted. Fear was a useful tool, and the Velthari wielded it well. Other species whispered that humanity had broken. 9 million dead in 11 minutes. What could a small civilization do against such power? The humans had probably fallen into civil war, or collapsed into despair, or simply accepted that they would never matter in a galaxy ruled by ancient empires. Some felt pity. Most felt nothing at all. They were all wrong. Behind the silence, humanity was transforming. On the day after New Meridian burned, the leaders of Earth's nations gathered in Geneva. They came from countries that had been enemies for centuries. Old grudges, old wars, old hatreds that had defined human history. They sat across from each other in a great hall, And for the first time, none of that mattered. A woman named Director Chen stood before them. She had led Earth's intelligence services for 20 years, and she had watched the broadcast of New Meridian from beginning to end without looking away. "We have a choice," she said. "We can mourn, and then we can move on. And we can accept that we are small and weak, and that the galaxy will always treat us this way. Or we can become something else." She paused. "I am not interested in justice. The Galactic Council will not help us. No one will fight our battles. If we want to answer what was done to our people, we must do it ourselves. But I am not interested in war either. War is what they expect. War is what they are prepared for. They have fleets that could crush us in a month." "Then what do you propose?" asked the president of the European Federation. Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I propose that we do something worse than kill them. I propose that we make them never exist." The room was silent. "The Velthri are proud," Chen continued. "Prouder than any species we have ever studied. Their entire civilization is built on legacy. They carve their names into stone at birth. They build monuments designed to last 10,000 years. Their greatest fear is not death, it is being forgotten. They would rather die in agony than be erased from history." She pressed a button, and images appeared on the screens around the room. Velthri temples, archives, monuments, databases. "We cannot defeat their fleets, but we can destroy something far more precious to them. We can destroy their memory. Every record of their existence, every monument to their achievements, every name they have ever carved into stone. We can make it so that 1,000 years from now, no one in the galaxy will remember that the Velthri ever lived." The vote was taken that night. It was unanimous. Project Lethe was born, named after the River of Forgetting in ancient Greek mythology. Project Lethe brought together the greatest minds humanity had ever produced. Scientists and soldiers, hackers and historians, psychologists and engineers, all working toward a single goal. They studied the Velthri with obsessive detail. They learned their language, their culture, their religion, their fears. They mapped every archive, every database, every monument in Velthri space. They identified weaknesses in Velthri computer systems and found allies among species who had suffered under Dominion rule at the same time. Engineers worked in secret shipyards on the dark side of Luna. They built a new fleet, but not a fleet designed for traditional war. These ships were fast and silent, equipped with stealth technology that could slip past Velthri sensors. They carried small teams of specialists rather than armies of soldiers. They were not meant to conquer territory. They were meant to erase information. The work took 3 years. 3 years of silence, while the galaxy forgot about the small species that had retreated into isolation. 3 years while the Velthri grew comfortable in their victory. 3 years while humanity prepared something the galaxy had never seen before. Director Chen oversaw every detail. She slept for hours a night and spent the rest reviewing reports, adjusting plans, and recruiting agents. She interviewed thousands of volunteers, men and women who had lost family on New Meridian. Soldiers who had watched the broadcast and sworn vengeance. Scientists who wanted to prove that humanity could do what no other species had ever done. She asked each of them the same question. Are you willing to fight a war that no one will ever know about? A war with no glory, no monuments, no history? A war whose only victory is silence? Every one of them said yes. As the 3rd anniversary of New Meridian approached, the fleet was ready. The agents were trained. The plans were complete. Humanity had transformed itself from a scattered collection of colonies into a single weapon aimed at the heart of Velthri civilization. On the morning of the anniversary, Director Chen stood before the assembled fleet commanders. Behind her, a screen showed the burning ruins of New Meridian, the same image that had been broadcast to 14,000 worlds 3 years ago. They wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about humanity, she said. They wanted to show that we were weak, that we could be crushed, that we did not matter. Today we begin teaching our own lesson. She turned to face the screen. We're going to do something that has never been done in galactic history. We are going to erase a species. Not kill them, that would be too quick, too merciful. We are going to make it so that they never existed. Every record of their history, every monument to their achievements, every name they have ever spoken, all of it will be gone. 1,000 years from now, scholars will search for evidence of the Velthari dominion and find nothing. They will become a mystery, a gap in the records. A question that no one can answer. She paused. And when other species ask what happened to them, we will say the same thing we say now. We don't know who you mean. There is no such species. There never was. The fleet commanders nodded. They understood that afternoon. Earth's communication channels opened for the first time in 3 years. A single message was broadcast to every inhabited world in the galaxy, to the Velthari homeworld, to the Galactic Council, to every species that had watched New Meridian burn. The message was simple. You wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about humanity? Class is now in session. High Admiral Kethvorn received the message in his private chambers. He read it twice, then laughed. The humans were threatening them? The species that had hidden for 3 years, too weak to fight back? This was not a declaration of war. This was the desperate posturing of a broken civilization. He ordered his advisors to prepare a response and return to his duties. He did not know that human ships were already inside Velthari space, moving silently through the darkness between stars. He did not know that agents had been planted on Velthari worlds for months waiting for the signal to begin. He did not know that the war had already started. A war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. By the time he understood what was happening, it would be far too late. The lesson had begun. The Velthari expected an attack on their military bases. They reinforced their border stations, deployed additional patrols, and positioned their fleets for battle. High Admiral Kethvorn was confident. The humans had been bold with their message, but boldness meant nothing against superior firepower. When they came, his forces would crush them. The humans did not come for his bases. They did not come for his fleets. They came for something the Velthari had never considered a military target. They came for the past. The first strike hit the archive of Kethvora, a moon that housed 10,000 years of Velthari history. Every birth record, every lineage scroll, every name of every Velthari who had ever lived was stored in vast underground vaults protected by the most advanced security systems in the Dominion. The human team arrived in a small ship disguised as a merchant vessel. They landed during a shift change and moved through the facility like ghosts. Using access codes stolen by agents who had worked undercover for 2 years, they did not kill the guards. Dead bodies would raise alarms too quickly. Instead, used sedatives and left the guards sleeping peacefully at their posts. The archive's computer systems were ancient and proud, designed to preserve data for eternity. The humans spent 4 hours uploading a virus that would corrupt every file, every backup, every redundant system. When they left, the archive looked exactly as it had before. The guards woke up with headaches and remembered nothing unusual. 3 days later, the corruption activated. 10,000 years of records dissolved into meaningless noise. The archivist tried to recover the data, but the virus had been designed by the best hackers humanity had ever produced. There was nothing left to recover. The Velthari High Council received the news with shock and rage. But before they could respond, reports came in from across the Dominion. The archive of Kethvora was not the only target. Human teams had struck simultaneously on 7 different worlds. Libraries burned. Museums found their collections destroyed. Universities discovered that their historical databases had been wiped clean. The attacks were surgical and precise, targeting information rather than lives. In some cases, the Velthari did not even know. They had been attacked until they tried to access records that no longer existed, and then the humans moved to Phase 2, the Galactic. Archives were housed on neutral stations throughout the galaxy, vast repositories of knowledge maintained by the Galactic Council, where every species stored copies of their history and achievements. The Velthari had contributed millions of records over 12,000 years. These records were protected by galactic law, untouchable by any single species. But the humans did not attack the archives directly. Instead, they found allies. In the 3 years of silence, human diplomats had been working in secret. They had reached out to species who had suffered under Velthari rule, civilizations that had been conquered, exploited, or humiliated. Some of these species held positions in the galactic archives. Some had access to systems that were supposed to be secure. One by one, Velthari records began to disappear from the galactic databases. Trade agreements vanished. Scientific papers were deleted. Historical documents were marked as corrupted and purged. The deletions were small at first, easy to miss among millions of files, but they were constant, relentless, spreading through the archives like a slow disease. When the Velthari discovered what was happening, they demanded that the Galactic Council intervene. The Council appointed investigators who found evidence of tampering but could not identify the source. The humans had covered their tracks too well. Officially, the deletions were attributed to system failures. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth. Phase 3 was psychological. Human ships began appearing on the edges of Velthari space, broadcasting messages on civilian frequencies. But the messages were not threats or demands. They were questions. Who was the first Velthari emperor? No one seems to remember. The Temple of Kol Setheri was built to honor a great hero. What was his name? How many generations have lived on the colony world of Rethkano? The records are unclear. The questions were designed to plant seeds of doubt. The Velthari knew their own history, or they thought they did. But when they searched for answers, they found gaps. Records that should have existed were missing. Names that should have been carved in stone had been sandblasted away. The humans were not just destroying information. They were making the Velthari question what they knew about themselves. Admiral Kethforn finally understood what he was facing. This was not a war for territory or resources. This was a war for existence itself. The humans were trying to erase the Velthari from history. He assembled the largest fleet in Dominion, history, and sent it to hunt down the human attackers. But the humans would not fight. Their ships were too fast, too small, too well hidden. They struck supply lines and vanished. They destroyed communications, relays, and disappeared into the darkness. They did not try to hold ground because ground did not matter. Only information mattered. And information could not be defended by warships. The Velthari fleet chased shadows while human teams continued their work. Monument after monument was defaced. Database after database was corrupted. The Dominion was bleeding from 1,000 small wounds. They could not stop the bleeding. 6 months after the war began, Velthari High Council authorized a desperate measure. They would negotiate. A Velthari ambassador named Kithsalani traveled to a neutral station and requested a meeting with a human representative. He waited for 3 days before a woman arrived. She wore a simple uniform with no rank markings. She did not give her name. "This is madness," Kithsalani said. "You are destroying irreplaceable history. You are erasing knowledge that belongs to the entire galaxy. What do you want? Reparations. We will pay. Territory. We will give it. Tell us your demands and we will meet them." The woman looked at him with calm, patient eyes. "You broadcast the death of 9 million of our people to the galaxy," she said. "You laughed while our children burned. You invited other species to learn from our pain. Did you think there would be no response? We can rebuild New Meridian," Kethsalani said. "We can pay for the lives that were lost. We can make amends. Amends." The woman's voice did not change, but something cold entered her eyes. "You cannot make amends for what you did. You cannot pay for 9 million lives with credits or territory. There is only one price we will accept. Name it." The woman stood. "We want you to never have existed. We want every record of your species erased from history. We want your monuments to stand empty, with no one to remember who built them. We want your children to grow up unable to read the language of their ancestors. We want scholars 1,000 years from now to search for evidence of the Velthari Dominion and find only silence." She walked toward the door. "That is our price, and we will collect it whether you agree or not." Kethsalani stood frozen as she left. He had come to negotiate, but there was nothing to negotiate. The humans did not want peace. They did not want justice. They wanted something far worse. They wanted oblivion. He returned to the homeworld and reported his failure to the High Council. The war would continue. But as he spoke, he saw something in the faces of the council members that he had never seen before in Velthury. Leadership, fear. The humans had found the one weapon against which the Velthury had no defense. They had found the one punishment worse than death, and they were only getting started. The war lasted 7 years. In that time, the Velthury Dominion did not fall. Their worlds remained inhabited. Their people continued to live and work and raise families. From the outside, the Dominion looked much as it always had, 47 planets orbiting their stars. Cities rising toward the sky, ships moving through the void, but something essential had been taken from them. Something that could never be replaced by the 3rd year of the war. Human forces had been joined by a coalition of other species. The Methroni, who had been conquered by the Velthury 8 centuries ago. The Voss Collective, whose homeworld had been strip-mined for Dominion resources. The Kelthani, who had watched their own archives burn under Velthury occupation. These species had their own grievances, their own memories of cruelty and humiliation. They had waited for someone to strike back, now that someone had. The coalition pushed deeper into Dominion space, but they did not fight traditional battles. They fought a war of erasure. Human linguists created a virus that targeted Velthury educational systems. The virus was subtle, almost elegant in its design. It did not destroy data immediately. Instead, it slowly corrupted the written Velthury language, changing characters by tiny degrees, introducing errors that compounded over time. Teachers noticed that their students struggled to read older texts. Scholars found that ancient documents no longer matched their translations. Within a generation, researchers predicted, no Velthury child would be able to read the words of their ancestors. The Velthury tried to fight back. They created backup systems, isolated their networks, printed physical copies of their most important texts. But the coalition had agents everywhere, and the corruption spread faster than it could be contained. By the 5th year of the war, the Velthury written language had fractured into dozens of incompatible variants. Communication between worlds became difficult. The past became unreadable. Then the coalition came for the monuments. The Velthury homeworld was covered with statues and temples and memorial halls. Every great leader, every hero, every event worth remembering had been carved into stone and metal. These monuments had stood for thousands of years, testaments to Velthury glory. Human teams did not destroy them. Destruction would create martyrs, symbols of resistance that future generations could rally around. Instead, they did something far more cruel. They removed the names, working at night. Moving through cities with stolen access codes, the team sandblasted inscriptions from pedestals and dissolved plaques with acid. They targeted the statues of emperors and generals, leaving the stone figures standing, but erasing every mark that identified who they were. They visited memorial halls and removed the lists of names from the walls. They found the sacred stones where Velthury carved their identities at birth and reduced them to blank slabs. The monuments remained, but they meant nothing now. A statue without a name is just a shape. A memorial without names is just an empty room. The Velthury could still see their history, but they could no longer know it. The psychological effect was devastating. Velthury society had always been built on legacy. Parents named their children after ancestors. Families traced their lineages back for dozens of generations. To be a Velthury was to be part of an unbroken chain stretching back to the founding of their civilization. Now that chain had been shattered, young Velthury grew up unable to read the writings of their grandparents. Families searched for their lineage records and found only corrupted files. The names of the dead faded from memory as the monuments that honored them became anonymous. A generation was rising that had no connection to the past, no knowledge of where they came from, no sense of the history that had shaped them. In the 6th year of the war, the Galactic Council held a vote. The motion was simple. No member world would maintain records of Velthury history. All existing records would be classified, sealed, and eventually destroyed. The Velthury Dominion would be erased from the official history of the galaxy. The vote passed. By a margin of 94%, some species voted out of fear they had seen what happened to those who opposed humanity. and they did not want to be next. Others voted out of justice. They remembered their own suffering under Velthari rule and felt that this punishment was deserved. A few voted out of simple pragmatism. The war was disrupting galactic trade. They wanted it to end. The reasons did not matter. The result was the same. The Velthari sent diplomats to every world that would receive them, begging for mercy. They offered unconditional surrender. They offered to execute their own High Admiral, to pay reparations that would bankrupt their economy, to accept any terms humanity demanded. They would do anything, give anything, if only the erasure would stop. Humanity's response was delivered by Director Chen herself. In a message broadcast to every world in the Dominion, the Velthari cannot surrender, she said, because there are no Velthari. There is no war. There is no record that this conflict occurred. When future generations search for information about your species, they will find nothing. When they ask what happened to the Dominion, no one will be able to answer. You will become a gap in history, a mystery that cannot be solved. She paused and her eyes were cold. You wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about humanity? You taught us that we were weak, that we did not matter, that we could be killed for entertainment. We learned your lesson well. Now we are teaching one of our own. The broadcast ended. In the final year of the war, human teams conducted what they called the last collection. They moved through Velthari space, gathering every piece of evidence they could find: images, recordings, documents, artifacts. This evidence was not destroyed. Instead, it was transported to Earth and placed in a sealed vault deep beneath a mountain range. The vault was designed to last for 10,000 years. No one would ever be allowed to open it. The last collection served two purposes. First, it removed the final traces of Velthari history from the galaxy. Second, it proved that humanity could have remembered but chose to forget. The vault was not a memorial. It was a statement, a declaration that the erasure had been deliberate, complete, and irreversible. On the 7th anniversary of New Meridian, the war ended. There was no treaty signed, no formal surrender, no celebration. The war simply stopped because there was nothing left to fight over. The Velthari still existed as a species, but everything that had made them Velthari, their history, their culture, their identity was gone. The last act of the war was performed by a human archivist named James Porter. He was tasked with organizing the evidence in the sealed vault before it was closed forever. He spent 3 months cataloging images of monuments, recordings of speeches, copies of texts that would never be read again. When he finished, he created a single file, a summary of everything the vault contained. He tagged it with a simple note: contents, unknown species, context, none, status, forgotten. Then he left the vault, and the doors sealed behind him, and the lights went out, and the Velthari Dominion ceased to exist in any way that mattered. The galaxy moved on. Trade routes reopened. Diplomatic relations were restored. Within a decade, most species had stopped thinking about the war at all. There were more important things to worry about: economics, politics, the endless business of civilization, and in the spaces where the Velthari had once been, there was only silence, Silence that would last for 200 years. 200 years had passed since the end of the Dominion War. The galaxy had changed in ways, both great and small. Empires had risen and fallen. New species had joined the Galactic Council. Old conflicts had been forgotten, and new ones had taken their place. Humanity had changed as well. The small species that had once controlled a handful of colony worlds now administered one of the largest territories in the galaxy. Human ships traveled every trade route. Human diplomats sat at every negotiating table. Human culture had spread across thousands of worlds, absorbed and transformed by countless alien civilizations. No one remembered them as victims anymore on a research station orbiting a distant star. A young historian named Thessin Vor was studying the rise of human power. She belonged to a species called the Lethkani, a peaceful people known for their dedication to preserving knowledge. She had spent 5 years researching humanity's sudden emergence as a major galactic force, and she had found something strange. There was a gap. The records showed that humanity had entered a period of isolation approximately 200 years ago. When they emerged from that isolation, they were transformed, unified, powerful, and armed with technology that should have taken centuries to develop. The records also showed that this transformation coincided with something called the Dominion War. But when Thiessen Vor searched for information about the Dominion War, she found almost nothing. There were references to military campaigns, resource allocations, casualty reports, but the identity of humanity's enemy had been redacted. Every record that should have named the opposing species contained only blank spaces, corrupted files, or the phrase data expunged. She had found a mystery, and mysteries were her specialty. Thiessen Vor traveled to Earth, the capital of human civilization, to access their historical archives. She was surprised by how easily she was granted permission. Human officials welcomed her with courtesy and assigned her a guide to help navigate the vast collection of documents. For 3 weeks, she found battle plans with enemy positions marked, but enemy names removed. She found diplomatic correspondence with entire paragraphs blacked out. She found memorial services for human casualties that never mentioned who had killed them. The absence was systematic, deliberate, complete. She requested interviews with elderly humans who had lived through the war. Most were reluctant to speak, but a few agreed to meet her. "What can you tell me about the Dominion War?" she asked a retired soldier named Marcus Webb. He was 140 years old. His body maintained by human longevity treatments, his eyes still sharp. "It was a difficult time," he said. "We lost people. We made sacrifices. We did what needed to be done. But who was the enemy? What species were you fighting?" Webb looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, and there was something sad in his expression. "There was no enemy," he said. "There was only a lesson." That was all he would say. The SSN-VOR continued her research. She found a partial document in a forgotten subarchive of the Galactic Council, a fragment of a broadcast showing the orbital bombardment of a human colony. The images were horrific. Cities burning, people dying, flames consuming everything. A voice accompanied the footage, mocking the victims, laughing at their deaths. But the speaker's face was corrupted beyond recognition. Their words were garbled, their species unidentifiable. 9 million dead. An entire colony destroyed. And no record of who had done it. She brought the document to a human official named Ambassador Sarah Chen. The name was famous in human history. Sarah. Chen was a direct descendant of the woman who had led humanity through the Dominion War. She was now one of the most powerful diplomats in the galaxy. "I found this in the Council archives," Thiessen Vor said, placing the document on the ambassador's desk. "It shows the destruction of a human colony by an unknown species. Can you tell me who they were? What happened to them?" Ambassador Chen studied the document. Her face revealed nothing. "I'm afraid I don't understand your question," she said. "This document shows an attack on a human world, but there's no identification of the attackers. Without knowing who they were, I can't tell you what happened to them. But surely someone remembers. Surely there are records somewhere." Chen shook her head. "We've searched for centuries. Historians, archaeologists, intelligence analysts, everyone has tried to identify the species responsible for this attack. We found nothing. No records, no monuments, no descendants. If a species had existed capable of doing this, there would be some evidence. And there is no evidence." She pushed the document back across the desk. "I can only conclude that whatever you think you've found is a mistake. A corrupted file, perhaps? Or a forgery. There is no species that matches this attack because no such species ever existed." Thiessen Vor stared at her. "That's impossible. Species don't simply vanish. They leave traces, genetic material, archaeological remains, references in the histories of other civilizations. Something must remain." Ambassador Chen stood and walked to the window. Outside, human ships moved through the orbital stations that circled Earth. The planet below was green and blue, covered with cities that stretched across continents. "Let me tell you something," she said. 200 years ago, humanity learned an important lesson about the galaxy. We learned that being peaceful and diplomatic was not enough to protect us. We learned that other species would destroy us for entertainment if we were too weak to stop them. She turned to face Thies and Vor. But we also learned something else. We learned that the galaxy has a long memory. Crimes committed centuries ago still shape politics today. Grievances are passed down through generations. Species hold grudges for thousands of years. Memory is power in this galaxy. It shapes who we are and who we can become. She paused. So we asked ourselves, what happens when you take that power away? What happens when you erase a species not from existence, but from memory? When you destroy not their bodies, but their legacy? When you make it so that 1,000 years from now, no one will remember their name, their culture, their achievements? Her voice was calm, almost gentle. The answer is simple. They cease to matter. They become nothing. Not dead. Death creates martyrs. Not defeated. Defeat creates legends. Simply, ... nothing. A gap in the records. A question that cannot be answered. A mystery that will never be solved. Afti. Felsen Veers felt a chill run through her. You did this, she said. You erased them. Chen smiled. I don't know what you mean. Erased who? There's no evidence that any species committed this attack. Perhaps it never happened at all. Perhaps the document you found is simply a fragment of fiction, a story someone invented to explain a gap in the records. She returned to her desk. But I will tell you this. The galaxy is watching. It is always watching. Every species that considers attacking humanity, every empire that thinks we are weak, every civilization that believes it can make us suffer without consequence, they all see the same gap in the records. They all ask the same questions you are asking, and they all come to the same conclusion. Her eyes met Thies and Vor's. Whatever happened to that species, it was complete. It was permanent, and it could happen again. Thies and Vor left Earth the next day. She returned to her research station and submitted her findings. The Dominion War had been fought against an unknown enemy, the identity of which could not be determined. Her colleagues reviewed her work and agreed that the mystery was unsolvable. The topic was marked as closed, but she did not forget. Years later, she found herself at a diplomatic reception, standing beside a human admiral who had commanded fleets in distant campaigns. They spoke of trivial things, whether politics, the quality of the wine, until Thies and Vor asked a question that had haunted her since Earth. Do you ever think about them? The species you erased? The admiral was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes, he said. Late at night when I'm alone, I wonder if we went too far. I wonder if there was another way. I wonder what they might have become if we had shown them mercy. He finished his drink, but then I remember 9 million dead. I remember the broadcast. I remember the laughter. And I think, no, we did not go too far. We did exactly what was necessary. He turned to leave, then stopped. The lesson was never for them, he said. They are gone, and nothing can bring them back. The lesson was for everyone else. For every species that watches us, judges us, considers whether we are weak. For every empire that might think of making us suffer for entertainment. He looked at her with ancient, patient eyes. The lesson is simple. You can kill us. We are mortal, like anyone else. But if you make us watch, if you mock our dead, if you turn our grief into your spectacle, he smiled and there was no warmth in it, then we will not destroy you. We will do something worse. We will make it so you never were. He walked away, leaving Thies and Vor alone with her thoughts. Outside the windows, stars burned in the endless dark, the same stars that had watched the Velthri Dominion rise and fall and vanish from memory. Somewhere in that darkness, a sealed vault held the only evidence that a species had ever existed. No one would ever open it. No one would ever know. And the galaxy remembered the lesson. It always would.